Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius, the nicest man to be caught in a disaster movie with. How are you doing? Okay.
I'm okay, but I'm a little mad that God kind of lied to us about never destroying the Earth again. You know, like, talk about, just reading the fine print. He's like, well, I said with a flood. I never said with a rogue star.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're going to express that anger in the most pleasant way possible for at least 80% of this conversation, and then turn it to fury right at the end. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are touching on. We're kicking off our 50s block. This is a block of films. We're 6 films we are doing from the 1950s, and we are starting with 1951's When Worlds Collide. A couple of information directed by Rudolph Maté, script by Sidney Bohem, and based on a novel. I didn't realize this when I read it, but by Edwin Bulmer, and starred a bunch of people from the 50s, which was, I could read out their names. I don't know any of them. I don't think they sort of stand out as particular stars. So, sorry, I'm not going to worry too much about the actors. But the general principle of this film is it is identified that the Earth is literally going to collide with a star is passing by. It's pulling a planet with it, and we are going to collide. And a small, very small selection of humans are going to jump on a rocket ship and make their way to this other planet, leaving Earth to be destroyed in their wake, but make a new home on this new planet. And it's going to deal with the journey of building that rocket and the selection of people that are going to go with it. So this film should be all about high tension and human drama and discussions around why people get chosen. It's not as much as I'd like it to be, but yeah. So from the back then, Julie, what were your initial thoughts then about When Worlds Collide?
Well, I don't think I've ever seen this before. And I was amazed. I think the thing that strikes me the most is how much disaster movies owe to this, especially sci-fi disaster movies. Armageddon, Deep Impact. I mean, they were, influenced by, there's that Clarke novel, like, God's Hammer or whatever it was. But, I think 2012 has a lot of the same beats.
Yeah.
Sort of, they even use the phrase "the day after tomorrow" in this movie. It seemed to me like to the point where some of those movies feel almost like remakes of this, and so many of the story beats in here get copied endlessly.
I think this. Yeah, I agree. Firstly, I as I was going through it, you could see that, like I say, 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow and a few other sort of those sorts of films, definitely sort of struck a chord. I was like, all right, that's where they came from. However, I think this almost feels like a prototype. It's sort of like it has all those beats, but how they get from beat to beat doesn't always work.
Well, give me an example.
So the main one is, well, firstly, this is the most pleasant disaster movie I think I've ever sat through. They're absolutely lovely to each other, even though there's a love triangle in this, where at the end of it, it's sort of like, well, you won her over, and you're just like, all right, that's it. But the one thing is, at the end, the whole film runs, and they work through the creation of the ship and the collection of the people and all this other stuff in the selection. And then when they board it at the very end, all of a sudden, all the other workers are like, grab your guns! This is a disgrace! Why weren't we chosen? And I'm like, where's this indignation come from? You've been working here for like like a set number of days, like several months or whatever. And I'm like, what? And there's just a lot of sort of slightly left turns all of a sudden in the sort of the way people are acting, which is fine, the way they deal with it. But that was the biggest. But there's a couple of them as they go.
Well, it is true that, like, definitely there is some sort of, like, 1950s sort of, like, oh, fair cop, gov, sort of, like, just people being super nice to each other. I kind of dig that. I mean, I can go with that. I know what you're saying about the abruptness of the grabbing machine guns. Although, because, I mean, originally the millionaire sponsor, he is concerned about everybody in the world coming to try to get to these rockets. And I'm confused. Like, weren't there rockets in countries around the world at some point? Isn't there a line of dialogue? And then that's just forgotten. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you never see any outside pressure. I mean, that's my number one complaint. I mean, the shots of New York devastated and flooded and stuff are cool, especially for the time. But, like, there's this whole plot about, like, this UN subcommittee and scientists not believing, in the data, or that, really they can do this rocket ship even if the data is correct. And, and I thought, okay, well, that kind of is interesting to think about global warming and the debate about that, and think about COVID and the debate about that. If this happened now, it would be like, look, this is all a conspiracy by the Lib Dems to, to get us to abandon God. God would never destroy the world this way. Only God can destroy the world. A rogue son can't destroy the world. You guys are only saying this because you hate God, and true patriots, don't believe this nonsense. So I know what you mean. Although I did want to say about the guns, like, I kind of like the idea that they're like, the women are all like, they're not going to revolt. All right. They're all like, they're cool with it.
Yeah.
But, and I did kind of like the fact that the men are like, they're willing to go along with this until they know they're not chosen. Once they know they're not chosen, they're like, well, screw this. This wasn't fair at all.
Yeah.
I kind of do dig that, though.
It is interesting to see, because, and you say about some of the politics in this, but it does feel like that there's two types of characters in this. They have, because this is very 50s. This is 1951. It's very post-war. It's post World War II. Other than sort of the rich millionaire, who's like, in a wheelchair. So to me, the instant I met him, I was like, oh, this is calling back to Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, like instant recognition. But everybody else is really noble. Everybody is incredibly sort of like, there's a couple that sort of get introduced at the end, and you can see how stories have developed over the time, because that couple would have been introduced so much earlier. But there's a couple, and they're announcing who's been chosen to go on the ship, and he is chosen and she isn't, and instantly his response is to walk into the head guy's office, hand in his thing, and be like, I'm not going. Someone else can have my seat. I'm staying here to die with my girl. Very, very noble. There's no follow-up on that story at all. He literally leaves the office and you're like, well, that's done with. There's no discussion of her going like, no, you have to go. Like, sort of. But I like the fact that instantly he hands it to the guy who's been pushing the wheelchair around for 6 years. And he's like, this is a good one. Right, well, I'm going then. And then gets out a gun, and I was like, so there's good moments where he has a real go at the rich guy as well. He's like, no, you're a scumbag, and I hate you, and like, and so there is some really good stuff in this, but it always feels like instant. It's like, and now we're doing this, and now we're doing that, and it's which just seems very 50s in its storytelling rather than the ideas, because the ideas are there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, like, first of all, I like that we don't see that couple earlier. Like, what I hate about disaster movies is that first, I mean, it's all about the payoff, right?
Yeah.
But I always hate that first cliched act, which is like, I'm just a soccer mom trying to get my kids to, it's like, okay, I don't want to watch that for 15 minutes just to care in theory about whether you live or die. I don't need that. 20 seconds of that is more than enough. So I kind of like it's mercifully brief in that respect. But yeah, I mean, they do kind of like because the head of the project, Dr. Hendren, does give a seat to the girl and insists that they go, and you do briefly see them on the rocket ship, so you're like, oh, okay, they got out. But there's this odd mixture. You're talking about like the goody two shoes sort of thing. What everybody is, I mean, including, the Dave Randall, sort of the main character, like, I don't deserve to go, give it to somebody else. But the flip side of that is like, there's this odd way in which that sort of 50s goody two-shoesism is merged and always tied with a sense of entitlement. And, you think about, I mean, yes, this rich guy only gets one seat for all of. I mean, I kept thinking, doesn't he have any loved one? Yeah, he only gets one seat. But meanwhile, Hendren is just like, look, I'm in charge. I'm going to put my daughter on this. I'm going to put the man she loves on this. I'm going to put this like kid we found on it.
And the dog.
We like him, and the dog. We can just put anyone we want on this. Everybody else draws lots. But I'm going to have this kind of noblesse oblige of like, you're a good guy. I'm going to put your girlfriend on it and you too. And I'll sacrifice myself. But there is a sense of like, like nobody questions his right to just like put a kid and a dog on this.
Yeah. And I agree, because again, the character of Dave Randall, he sort of seems to be sort of, when this film starts, because again, like yourself, I've never seen this film, so first off, I enjoyed a lot of it, I will say. But when he's introduced, and he's sort of they handcuff him to a like a black box, like a briefcase, kind of a metal briefcase thing. He's got to sort of like be the transporter for it. And he's a pilot and all this other stuff. Like instantly, he has been identified as in a specific way, especially sort of post-war. Like it's clear without even, I don't even know if they say it, but it's clear that he's fought in the war. He's done all this other stuff, so he's the one that's going to transport this stuff. And sort of by handcuffing him to the instant he was handcuffed to that thing, I was like, oh, well, you're surviving. Like, it was instant. I was like, well, you're making it to the end. There's no way you're not. But the ideas kept coming. There's some interesting things in this that's so analog as well, because obviously it's 51. He delivers it, and a guy goes, "Oh, great, you're here. Bring it straight in." He goes, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! I've got to check that you're the one of the people that can receive it." Pulls out a bunch of Polaroids. He's like, "Yeah, you're one of them. You can come in." Just like, what? It was bizarre. But you say about that noblism. Like you say, everyone does what they're supposed to do. Like nobody ever really questions anything. It's constantly sort of like, I've delivered this box, and now I'm going to stick around and learn about the contents. At no point does anyone go, "Well, you're done. Out the door, please. You need some sort of security clearance to be in this room to go and do, to see what's in this box." No, I'll just stick around. Thank you very much. The one thing I did like though, and I thought was interesting, is he's getting Hendren is getting his scientific sort of theories and his outputs, his results, peer reviewed. The whole start of the film is him going, "I've got these. Can someone check my homework?" Basically, and I was really impressed. There's because now, as you say, it comes out of a computer. Everyone takes it as read that it's correct, and there'll be a drop line, and they move on. This is like they spend like a good 5-10 minutes going, "No, we're going to check these results." And there's going to be some tension around it. And I actually liked that there was a bit of, no, we're not taking it as read. We are going to check these results and we're going to do this. So what were your thoughts on that sort of that introduction of the characters?
No, I did. I hadn't even really thought about that much. I mean, you're right that sort of disappeared. I was thinking of it in terms of like every time there's a astrological discovery, it goes through exactly this, where there's an announcement and it's like, well, we'll see what really comes of this once other people can confirm this. I liked there's this sort of scene where Randall gets on the elevator, and I think it's Joyce, the daughter of Hendren, who is on there, and she assumes that he knows what's in it, right? And so that's sort of the excuse for keeping him around. That they assume that he knows this, but I thought that was quite well done, and I thought, this is that plot line from every other disaster movie, where it's like, here's the prototype, and I think this works as well or better than most of them. And I quite like that. Like, I love the scene of him burning money. Where it's like, yeah, you told me that money's not going to matter very soon, and here we're 20 minutes later in the movie, and he's burning money, having fun with it. I thought, boy, that's a classic scene of just one of those characters having discovered, oh, wait, everything that mattered to me a day before doesn't matter anymore. And we've seen versions of that scene in a million disaster movies.
We
and
have.
Better than that.
Oh, no, it is. But I think it's because of the way he approaches it. He approaches it almost in a sort of like a jovial tone. Like it's got a slight edge to it. But he's literally burning money to light cigars and stuff and cigarettes. And I love it when he offers it. There's a rich woman on a table next to him, and he offers, "Oh, do you like a light?" And she's like, she's not sure what to make of it. And they're out dancing, and it sets up the love triangle as well in this sort of starts to set up the love triangle between Joyce, Dr. Drake, and David Randall, and so there's all that going on. But I like the fact, but it's just sort of nice. Is the pro? When this is addressed later on in a modern disaster film, that same scene would come with angst, wouldn't it? That's the thing of the world doesn't. It would come with a level of depression. It wouldn't just be him burning $100. No, it'd be someone just pouring all the money into a bin and burning a lot, or smashing something. It'd be sort of like they'd up the ante of it doesn't matter anyway. It's all a waste, sort of thing. Drunk
you
and in
this into like a Michael Bay movie, but that's
it.
Doesn't matter.
Think Armageddon. There's that thing of they'd probably be drunk in a dressing gown, and throwing a whiskey.
Be a bar fight.
Yeah, exactly. This scene gets expounded into all kinds of things. I mean, this is the same scene. If you think Independence Day, when when they realize they can't defeat the aliens, and Jeff Goldblum gets drunk and sort of throws the bottle around. So it's that moment, like say, the realization that nothing matters. But this is sort of just it's incredibly well. They're all out dancing. No one's in fighting. No one's arguing. It's all very nice, which I enjoy, and I can take it in the context of the 50s. But I still struggle with no. In my head, I'll be like, what? How do I deal with this? It's bizarre.
Yeah.
But...
No, I have the same thoughts, and I do think that, I mean, there's certainly room for say somebody acting recklessly, and seeing that without it being so overdone, as it is today. But what I thought was, thinking of it from a sort of writing standpoint, that, one of the things that I'm very attracted to are movies and comics and books where I understand the point of every scene. And every scene isn't just advancing the plot. It's sort of part of the glory of a lot of these older movies is that, you could take out most of those scenes. Really, there's 20 minutes of material in this movie, and the rest is elaborations. And the scene of him burning money, I guess from a character point of view, you need some sort of scene to just show an adjustment has gone on. But the subtlety, the rich nuance of having that money being burned, and it's set up and and dialogue and paid off very quickly. But I think that scene is sublime. As scenes go, ways to illustrate that change, I've never seen that. That's pretty damn good. And what sticks with you as a viewer is the money being burnt. It's the subtlety, it's that nuance, rather than, nobody remembers those bar fights, right? Nobody remembers all the overdone stuff. I know what you're saying about them being too goody two shoes. But I don't know. Maybe I've just watched so much Star Trek that it doesn't bother me. Or maybe, I mean, I've been in love triangles where somebody said, no, you're right. Better off with you, and I'm like, whoa, how is that? You're waiting to stab me later, aren't you?
Yeah.
I was like, no. So I don't know. I mean, I kind of roll with it, but I know what you're saying.
Well, the thing is, as well, it does feel a little underdone in places. There are moments from a story point of view I feel are underdone. However, you say about some of the plot bits of that, some of the stuff in this, I like that they face it head on as well. So when they actually come to building the ship, there's two bits that I really enjoy. The first is they identify that they need capital. And they're like, well, we've got to fund this, like this, because in many cases it's sort of like, well, the government's been building this ship for the last 18 years that we didn't know about, and that's lucky. Like even in you mentioned 2012, the film was, we've got these arcs that have been hidden in the mountains. Like, oh Christ, like that. At least with this, they're like, right, we need the money, and so we have to sort of like make a deal with the devil kind of thing, and you bring this guy in. But more than that, they actually turn to their students or these young, and they're like, they make this thing about, no, these are the younger people. These are the people that need to be on it. And they say, like, there's two scenes of them talking to the women and these class of men going, you're our best engineers and our best researchers and all this other stuff. Like, you are the people of the future. And it feels like, although I sort of, you joke about the goody two shoes nature of it, there's a positivity about the future of this film. Although the world is ending, there's still this positivity of like, no, the younger generations are going to go on and do amazing things. And I just felt that sort of carried through in this film about sort of like, we'll get on to maybe generational theory, but like in this, there's an older generation going like, we've had our time, we've had our dues, like, let's let the younger people take these ideas on and stuff. And I thought that's really interesting because, I don't think you get that as much these days. Unless it was sort of like, well, we've got to appeal to the 4 quadrants, so we've got to make sure there's a younger audience, so we've got to get the young people in there. But like literally in this, all the older people are there to facilitate this ship that's going to carry the younger people off. And I just thought that was really interesting, sort of.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's a little bit World War II, right? I mean, it's like, everybody I know who was in World War II was like, yeah, I mean, some of our commanders told us to do stupid shit, but you did it, and you figured like, well, I just hope I don't die. Well, we're still gonna do it, right? We were told to, and what are you gonna do? I mean, we're fighting Hitler or something. You're gonna, people are gonna die, and people didn't complain as much. Not to fall into some, greatest generation crap, because I think that's crap. It wasn't exactly examined thinking, but I think what's interesting is that is the way they should be. I also thought that a lot of the younger generation is like, yeah, you're in my age, right? They're not not really kids, right? Yeah. The other thing is, right. But today it's like all the baby boomers, are like, no, I want that tax cut. You give that to us old people. You pay for college yourself. We got it for $100 a semester. You guys, I don't care if you go in debt for $100,000 for 4 years. Good luck with that. I want mine. So there is sort of that. It does feel like that would not be the case today.
No, and that's exactly it. And that was the comparison as I watched this. Was exactly that. Was this idea of the sort of this older, like you get like Hendren and I forget the other guy's name, his mate, who was sort of like, we're building this ship, and but they're really at times hammer home the fact that like, no, the crew and everything else will be the younger generation, and like you say younger, like you say, it's the same as like any high school student in the CW, they're probably over 30. But it's a real focus on the future, and I just found that refreshing, and especially at the moment when there is this thing of sort of like, yes, I understand respect your elders and this other thing of, the experience of life, but there's this real sort of like knocking of the younger generations at the moment, and going like, well, yeah, we don't want this and we don't want that, and well, you have to sort this out for yourselves. And it's sort of like, but this was really like, no, we are building for the future, and it had that sort of idealistic sentiment that I felt was, this is a really positive, despite the fact the world's ending. There's a real positivity to this film, which was pleasant.
Right, and it does sort of know that it's raising that, right? In the sense of Stanton, the rich dude, saying, they have these discussions about human nature, and he's like, just to be safe, let's make sure we get machine guns, which wind up only being used against them, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like people should have that attitude about the younger generation. I mean, and I know a lot of people who do. I certainly have, I had many of these conversations where, what matters is old in the long run, what young people have to deal with. That doesn't mean that while I'm alive, I'm not going to still try to make great art and make awesome podcasts and everything else. But, at the end of the day, if you have a choice, what matters is that the policies and stuff, make for a better world going forward. But I think it's also interesting that Stanton is the rich, as far as presentations of the world, the rich are presented as jerks, right?
Oh,
like a lovely view of humanity, but it's not it's a very, in some ways it's a very American sort of, rosy 50s sort of depiction, but it's weirdly anti-capitalist.
Well, you're right, because again, like Stanton is akin to Potter, like he from It's a Wonderful Life. I instantly made that judgment, but the other character, when he's burning the money, the woman he offers the rich woman, and she turns his nose up him, and there's a real sort of snootiness to that, like no, and there's this anti-capitalist, anti-rich sort of feel to the film. The other thing as well is I found which was interesting, is this project, this rocket ship, there is no, or at least I could pick up, there's no real tie to the government. This is almost like a private project that's been funded, and at no point did they ever really go into sort of like, well, the government's got their rocket, or they're doing this or doing that. It's like, no, you're going to sit with this. It's very much about the individuals. This is about, and I won't say it's anti-government. There's no anti-government sentiment, but it's very much detached from this idea of government taking control.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and we've had a lot of conversations about sort of how movies present the government and how they present what sort of government or police can be successful. And here it's just absent. Here, I mean, and you do find yourself wondering, although I find myself wondering this about a lot of movies that are much later and don't have this excuse, what the larger world is like, right?
Yes.
What about the other 5 billion people who are like, I guess we just have to die. What did their governments do? I mean, were there countries where they just said, yeah, don't believe this American ski propaganda? Or are there, did the government try to at least, I don't know, I mean, do you see evacuations going on? That is clear.
But only from the coast. And that was the thing I thought was interesting, because, again, the thing I picked up, because we'll talk about the special effects and the destruction scenes in this, which are wonderfully quaint, but we'll get to those. but you're right. But the two things I thought was interesting is there's a scene where they are giving a demonstration of the design of the ship and how it's going to work. It's a little exposition scene of like, we're going to use gravity and it's going to push off and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, cool. You get that in that again, that's another thing. Like if you've watched like Armageddon or any of these things, like it's there. The same things. There's going to be that moment where they give you the sort of dumbed down explanation of how this is going to work. Brilliant. I'm happy with that. It looks fine. But it struck me as like, so this is a private design that Hendron's come up with. He appears to be keeping it to himself. At any point has he sort of gone, look, I know there's no internet, so you can't be like, I'm publishing on the internet. If you can build this and here's the instructions, go for it. But like, surely, like he could have been, because they mention like the UN as well, in the film. Like, surely at some point he could be going like, right, if you want them, here's the blueprints. Like, here's how this will work. Here's how the weight capacity. Here's everything I've got. Here's all my calculations. If you want to build one or many, go for it.
Yeah.
It seems
No,
a
that's a
bit.
very good point. Um, and that UN business is really outside of the newspapers indicating evacuating the coast. That scene with the UN that is later called a subcommittee meeting,
Mm,
um, where Dr. Hendren speaks and is sort of denounced. That's the only real functioning government officials who you see in the film, and it is done almost in a ridiculing way, right?
mm.
Like, I mean, at least the UN is incompetent. And later on, you hear through dialogue, oh, scientists have recanted that. They just now think the rocket won't work. Um,
Yeah.
but you make a very good point. I mean, there's no attempt to even interact with the outside world. Well, I mean, what does the outside world think about all these people being stationed in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah, because again, like I say, when we get to the evacuation and you see those evacuations, it's evacuating people from the coast to come inland. So they acknowledge that the planet, or at least the star coming past, is going to have a detrimental effect to something. They talk about tsunami, they talk about tidal waves, earthquakes. So they know something's coming. But but so it doesn't work. So we're just going to bring everybody inland. And like you say, if this had been a more modern film, if this was a modern film, you would have that montage of. Well, firstly, the destruction scene would last at least another 28 minutes. It's just
Yeah.
go on and on. But you would get that montage of, here's another, here's how it's going on in the States. Here's how it's going on in India, in China, in Russia, in Europe, in France or wherever. Landmark, and then when you do get the devastation, it's like, right, cliche of landmark number 1, landmark number 2, all being destroyed in different ways. And so yeah, but that wider world is the one thing in this film where I was like, I wonder what's going on just over that hill. Like what is going on outside the compound, and you never really get that. And I assume there's budgetary restraints and everything else that would have been going on at this point, but it feels like a strangely small film for the plot.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I don't know that I mind that.
No.
And I think that sort of like gestures in that direction are made, I think, a little more. I mean, even just some dialogue about like, what is the United States government doing? Some dialogue about that would go a long way, even a couple lines. But yeah, I mean, as far as like, certainly you're right. In a present day depiction, they would have those sorts of scenes. But those movies also feel so padded to me, right? I mean, they're first of all, they're always 2 hours plus, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, 3 hours, and most of it is so terrible, right? And you and I are both fans of sort of what you said, the sort of quaint special effects where you go for something, and I think those current incarnations, first of all, you have the full plot lines for every stupid character, most of whom are cliches. And I'm not here to watch a Lifetime movie, guys. This dispenses with all of that. I mean, it does have this love triangle, but it mostly is confined to a series of scenes, and and all of those scenes are doing something. They're interesting in some way. They're not just, oh well, we gotta show how the rest of the world is reacting. I prefer if they did, but I prefer if they did it in a minute. I don't need the half an hour.
Oh no, I agree. This doesn't need. When I say like a montage, like that's all it needs. Like sort of like a short montage, maybe even two. Give me two sort of montages into this film. One that says, "Here's the world doing their preparations," and then maybe post disaster, here's parts of the world dealing with it, just to see what's going on a bit. Now I know there's obviously budget restraints because you've got to show certain things. There'll be certain shots you've got to set up and do all the miniatures and stuff. But I think from what you're saying, like you say, there's a filmmakers now. Firstly, they're in love with the disaster porn of it all. Look what we can show. how many national monuments can I show him destroyed in a 15-minute section? And then you got to say you have to sort of round out. Oh, they think they're padding out every character. They're not really. They're giving them something to do, but they don't really have a personality. They have sort of like they're usually stereotypes in some way. And this is very functional in that way. It's very sort of concise, and I appreciate that. But if it was just if it breathed a little more into the world, I think I'd be even like say a radio in the background or something, and they all gathered around to hear what was going on in the rest of the world. Like, I'd be interested to see something like that.
That's a very good device. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that you'd imagine them doing without raising the budget. And you can imagine that working very well.
Because they do that at one point. They do have them like an SOS or a sort of a distress call coming in because they go out in the helicopter, and that sort of results in them use that device a little more to sort of give us that information. But it's not as detrimental as I thought it would be. I still enjoyed this film and sort of like was pulled along with it.
I think that distress call kind of like substitutes for a lot of that. And I find that whole distress call sequence very odd. Like, why are you flying out in this weird, I mean, it's one of those old fashioned helicopters where, I have vertigo. So I'm thinking like, I've got to hold on so I don't fall out. Good God. But why? I get that you're a humanitarian, but you're giving supplies to people who are going to be dead in hours anyway.
I thought that. When they drop, there's a small island with like they look like nurses and stuff on, and they drop them. Yeah, and they drop them some supplies, and all I was thinking is like, they're dead in like half a day. You surely need those because you've rationed what you've got at the barracks. Like, I know it's mean, but it seems a bit pointless.
Not to mention, you're taking a risk flying out in this helicopter over, like, all of Manhattan is flooded, right? This island is, like, supposedly close to Manhattan. I don't know what island this is. I mean, it's too small to be, it's like a hill that survived over the water. But, you're flying over vast stretches of flooded landscape. Clearly there's the fuel involved. There's a risk to the personnel. God forbid those nurses have guns and they're like, bring that hell because they're stranded.
Yes.
I mean, where are you going to go?
This is that goody two shoes nature of it. They sort of like they drop them some stuff, and at no point does anyone sort of go. They're just like, well, thanks very much, chum. We'll see you next time. And the pilot, all right, fly off.
Yeah. Even that kid, like, I like that the kid is like tied. He's got some kind of like contraption where he's, rags that he's tied to the chimney with. And you assume like his parents have drowned or been swept away, although there's no mention of it, right? Because that would be too much of a downer. But it's like, oh my Lord. First of all, why is there one house? Why is there a roof sticking through, a field, right? But, like, oh my Lord, we can't leave that little boy. Really? You're leaving like 1 billion boys and girls to die on this planet.
It is. They serve a purpose, don't they? It's that thing to remind you, like you say, post-devastation, it's that glimpse of the world that's now been flooded. But also, we have to remain heroic in this way, and so they have to have those scenes. They have to be given that. Because one of the things I will say is the end of this film, they foreshadow, or they don't foreshadow. They blatantly state that this thing is going to collide with the Earth and it will destroy Earth. Because this other planet is traveling at speed and all this other stuff. And I was thinking, well, so's Earth. Earth is traveling at speed as well. I didn't want to try and get into the astrophysics of it because I don't want that. But all I could think, all that sort of struck me, and we'll get to the end of this when we get to the end of this film, but if these two planets are literally going to collide, why is one surviving and not the other? And then when they land, well, surely there'll be like massive eco disruption on the other planet as well because it's traveling.
Well, I have an answer to this.
Okay.
I mean, but it has its own problems. So I mean, it's strange that once to confirm this, right? They just like the confirmation. It's like to look at some star charts and going like, okay. So the thing is, it's not that it's a rogue planet, right? It's a rogue star, and Belus is the star, and Zira is the planet they're going to land on. Zira is just like orbiting around the star.
It's caught in the star's gravity and being pulled with it. Yeah.
It's a solar system of one. And the star is what's going to collide with Earth and destroy Earth. That planet is just rotating around this star that's going to destroy us somehow. It's not really, it says collide. Although, what are the odds that we're going to collide with a rogue star?
Yeah, you'll be destroyed before you get
presumably. Well, I mean, really, Earth's, orbit would be thrown off, and the gravitational effect. I find myself wondering. So that's the premise, right? Is like that star is what's going to destroy Earth, and Zira is going to be okay, right? As a result, it's like one AU out or something. Although I do find myself wondering, like, I will do away with ever seeing anything else happening on Earth, but like I want to see like what is that star going to do to the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn? Like I want to see like oh really? That you've thrown another solar mass into the solar system. I want to see.
That's what I was curious about that, and I thought I'm going to sort of put that to one side because like if this star then bigger than our sun. So what happens then? Because there's, like you said, there's two solar masses there with massive gravitational pull. Like, that's that. I'm assuming this must have happened in space. Like, in an infinite space, and all there's these collisions must happen. But I was like, right, but like you say, surely every other planet in our solar system is going to be pulled out of its orbit. The sun will then be the gravitational will be sort of pulling on both of these. So, it was. I don't really need. This would be the problem with doing this film now, because you would then get a whole CGI fest of the two planets collide or the star colliding with our solar system, and you would see like Pluto disappear and so on and so forth. Is it like it engulfs the solar system? That would be the way it would. They'd have it almost as like a planetary countdown as it destroys all these things.
Which is so dumb because they're at different places in their orbits, right?
Yeah. What? Sorry, you mean the planets are not always aligned? And
this error is, that is almost as common as the like asteroid belts are just clock full. If I see one more goddamn ship flying through asteroid belts, where it's like this stuff would be colliding already. It's all pulverized by now. It drives me crazy.
But that's exactly what you'd see. You'd see that you would have that planet. That planetary countdown would be there. Like it'd be some executive in the studio going, "Well, we need to know it's getting closer to Earth. So can you destroy the planets as you get closer to Earth?"
We've based our depiction of this disaster movie on the video game Gyrus, where you're moving one planet closer to the sun.
Yeah, that would happen. It'd happen. But, so there are bigger questions, but there was some before we get it sort of jumps into this. One of the things you said before, though, this film is very science heavy without asking the big questions. It knows it doesn't want to answer those big questions. It doesn't want to get into sort of like the truth, and they probably I don't know how much they'd have known in '51. We were a couple of years away really from the space race kicking off, but. Like it's quite upfront in this idea of like, no, it's great. We can do rockets and there's all this great stuff. And it's very sort of optimistic about science. However, religion hangs over this film quite heavy. And I was not expecting that, as much as it does. It gets referenced repeatedly.
Well, you have a problem with references to our divine creator?
I don't know. No, not really. No, well... Being atheist, I was a bit like I was rather nonplussed, but
me too.
It felt sort of incongruous to a lot of what they were doing in the film. This whole thing. But then, like you say, they get called out about sort of about God, and then they but they constantly sort of go like, well, God, we trust in God and all this other stuff. And you're like, well, what?
How much do they talk about God except for like the opening? You just think, oh my God, it's the 50s. I get it. Everything's got to have this religious stamp, right? Remember,
Yeah.
like Forbidden Planet? One of my favorite sci-fi
Yes.
movies ever. They land there and they're like, there's that weird line about Jesus, and you're
Yeah.
like, there's no way we're getting to other planets and still believing in this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But so I just see that opening in the end is like, well, it's giving that religious stamp of approval, but it's also like, using this as, saying like, oh, this is a metaphor for the flood, or the flood is a metaphor for this sense of cataclysmic challenge to, the civilization, to the species survival. And, obviously that's retrogressive, right? I mean, because it's based on Stone Age religious beliefs. But there is a way in which I also thought, like, by the end, I thought that's kind of cool, right? Because we have to be prepared for these sorts of events, right? I mean, I am a passionate believer in, I mean, if you don't want to get out into the stars, no matter how difficult, you just hate humanity, because we're all going to die here, okay? And God forbid there's, a electromagnetic pulse or some cataclysmic problem like this. We're still worried about asteroids and stuff. But, we got all our eggs in one basket here on the planet. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer in that. And there is this way in which, that Bible stuff is corny. But by the end, I think, like, there's a certain percentage of people that if they thought about it would say, oh, yeah, well, the world flooded at one point. Here's the modern thing. We'd better maybe have that rocket program up and going. Maybe we should start building those arcs,
You mean this film was trying to call out to those sort of more conservative religious types?
Well,
Possibly. I don't know.
But I don't remember them talking like you do about, like, God. How often do they do that through the movie?
It just crops up. It's one of those things. It just sort of crops up in conversation. Like, it just dropped lines. It just felt like, because this film's so science focused, it just felt at times a little bit incongruous. But then, like you say, it was the 50s. It had just been the dialogue, I suppose. It's a different time, and it probably isn't even like you say, the beginning bit with the whole Genesis thing, and then the end of that sort of. It felt a little heavy-handed. And
to say the least.
yeah. But it just felt at times a little incongruous to me, as a sort of, again, as a modern viewer watching this, and sort of, they references that sort of thing. We're in the hands of God now, kind of thing. Or there's another line similar to that, and you're like, well, clearly you're not, because you're building the rocket. Like, you've taken this on to do this. Like, you're talking about how optimism for the future. Be upfront with this idea, but then I don't think they could. Again, different era, sort of, separated by 80 years or so.
But, I mean, you say that, and yet, like, yes, everything you are saying is absolutely correct. And there is a way in which, like, in the 1950s, the obvious strains between science and faith are not as clear, right? I mean, you can still say more easily in the 1950s, like, yes, I am a believer, and religion allows me, or science allows me to explore the divine creation and his plan, and of course that's untenable nonsense, right? But, it's a little easier to believe that in the 50s than it is today. But what you're saying, you make a perfectly good point. My only retort to that is I feel that today about everything. Like, you say that as if, like, we're not still doing that. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I hear people saying, like, well, let's pray for that the vaccine rolls out. Don't pray for it. On the goddamn vaccine, and wear your damn masks and stop. Humans did this, right? God did not breathe into their skulls and make them realize how to make a vaccine. Okay, this was hard-won scientific research over generations.
Yeah, no, I agree. If anything, I think it's gotten worse. And I think this is everything. We are living through an era of polarization, And weirdly, let's say, because I think I try not to be polarizing. I try not to be in that case. That common sense sometimes is a middle ground. And when I say middle ground, it's like accepting people's views. Doesn't mean doesn't mean I'm going to say there's a deity of any shape or form, but I'm happy for people to have those beliefs. Not my problem.
Right.
But in this film, sort of seems to be like that mashup of it. It's almost like, if anything, we've regressed. If you were to take that, this is like, there's an optimism for the future generations. There's an optimism in science in this film. There's an optimism, and then, yet they are still like, in that sort of, like you said, the goody two shoes, in that sort of yeehaw chum chum kind of way. If like, we'll make this journey, and it all sort of blends together in this fashion. Now, like you say, there's that polarization of like, no, we are hard science, and like you say that. You and I, but we've both admitted we are both atheists. But I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a. It's hard to say. Like, I suppose you can't really say a devout atheist. I'm not in that way that I'm not going to go out and start trying to sort of like convince people otherwise. I don't want to sort of get into debates with people online about their religious beliefs. I'm not there to convince anyone otherwise. But there are those that do. There are strong held beliefs or others or non-beliefs. I don't know how you describe it really, but there are people online that will go out, pick a fight or a debate or a fight with a religious person, to then try and pick their religious belief apart. And I think that's wrong for many reasons. But then on the other side, you have those sort of like those that do believe, that will constantly sort of throw shade at everyone else, to the extent of going, well, I don't think I need to wear a mask or have the vaccine because I've been bathed in the blood of Jesus. And you go, all right, well, that's creepy on so many levels, but all right, you do you. I don't know. I just think like this film, I almost feel like we've regressed from the position of the early 50s.
No, I think that's true, right? I mean, because it's disgusting to say, but look, I mean, there was a sense of, when you see this sort of like goody two shoes thing, even through like Joe McCarthy, there was a sense of, we're all in it together.
Yeah.
Joe McCarthy was censured. Joe McCarthy was, his own party turned against him. And yes, it was still an ugly chapter, and persecution of leftists in this country, not even communists, certainly went back. Wilson was doing it. This was just the newest Red Scare. And, HUAC was underway before McCarthy got into it. So even in the midst of all of that, there was a sense of, we're in this together. Democrats and Republicans cross lines way more than they do now. In fact, in the 1950s, people complained that there wasn't enough of an ideological distinction between the two parties. We've progressed quite a bit since then.
Progressed or regressed, I think, yeah.
Well, we have answered that newspaper hot take in a radical way. But I do think that, as disgusting to me as like the Catholic League is, and HUAC was, and all of this, I think that there was a sense of like, well, we're not going to argue against science. You don't hear about pulpits denying evolution, denying, they might not believe in evolution, but they wouldn't deny basic elements of science. Today, it is exactly as you say, that it's so polarized. And I think the reality on the ground is that, you were talking about being an atheist, and I am too. Most of my friends, most of the people that I encounter, and I'm sure the same thing with you, we are in countries where the majority of people have faith of some sort, whether devout or church-going or not. Most of the people we encounter are not atheists. They're perfectly capable of following science, following procedures. A doctor who is a Christian or a Hindu is perfectly capable of following protocol and having private beliefs that don't greatly influence their practice. That's fine. No possible argument between us and them. And I would, in fact, defend their right to continue with those beliefs were they ever challenged by the government. Um, but you do see this sort of shift. But there was a sort of agreement, a sort of tacit agreement, a sort of tacit consent of the governed, of like, well, when the scientists come down and the government decides this is policy, we're gonna go along with this. We're in it together. None of us really get our way. We can bitch about it, in bars, but at the end of the day, this is government policy. And I don't, Charles Lindbergh, Nazi that he was, when we went to war, said, I'm going to enlist and I will shut up about all of my complaints about being an isolationist, because I want us to win. I may not have wanted us to get into this war, but now we're in it and I'm an American and I want us to win. I don't see that kind of coming together today.
Well, I think it comes down to, and if anything, we're going down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It happens on both a macro and micro level. You talk about that as a nation, like, nation states now being divided. I mean, especially with the vaccine, you got private companies, Pfizer or AstraZeneca or whatever, going like, oh, we've agreed to deliver this much, but we can't, so we're going to deliver this much at the moment. We'll catch up, and then countries going like, yeah, but your factory's in our country, so ain't leaving our borders, mate. It's just the way it is. And so you see that, again, I understand that that's a real simplification of what's going on. But there's this on a macro level, there's this real sort of like, we're not in it together on this anti-globalization, or this move away from globalization that, well, if we all help, we're all better, which makes us all, which helps everybody. Like you said, we're all in it together. No. The people within my sort of these borders that, mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. I've got to do my bit because that's what I've promised. And this growth of nationalism then goes down to the next level internally, where you go, well, I'm Labour, I'm Conservative, I'm a Lib Dem, I'm whatever. All right, so you're now going to be down party lines, okay? And then I don't know if it was you and I that was talking about before, but this idea of labels and stuff are going like, I'm free to be gender fluid, whatever. But and you go, okay, brilliant. I'm happy for you to be whatever you want. In fact, I recently sort of tweeted about this idea. The idea of being gender fluid actually seems incredibly common sense to me the more I thought about it. But then you get people still going, yes, but I'm still in this box, or you can't call me this, or you can't say this, you can't do that. I'm like, well, instead of espousing sort of fluidity in ideas and stuff, you're now creating divisions. In order to sort of, in order to progress your idea, you're actually creating further divisions. And it's almost like we don't know how to do that without creating borders, and people sort of get scared and they go, well, I'm in this box, I'm in this camp, this is my clan, and I'm going to stay here. Release the Snyder Cut, that sort of thing. And you go, all right, well, if that's the hill you want to die on, that's the one you want to die on, go for it. But it's just sort of like you say, there is no longer that sort of, a rising tide, helps all ships.
Lifts all ships, John F. Kennedy. Yeah.
It's now a case of like the rising tide is going to help me, and I'm going to sink all you other bastard ships as we go up. That seems to be the mentality now.
Well, and I think there's too much of that. I mean, and and it is true about like the Snyder Cut and popular culture. I mean, and it's been true for a long time, right? I mean, these Nike shoes define me as a person, and screw you and your Adidas loyalty, right? I mean, come on, But I mean, that's become, I will agree that, I mean, one of the things that upsets me the most is the ways in which, you were talking about jargon and insider outsider sort of language, that's politically correct. Intersex is a useful term. Okay, explain that to somebody. It's annoying to have to explain it to everybody. When you're not your job as an intersex person is to elevate everybody else's consciousness. But but if somebody uses the wrong term, in real life, this usually isn't a problem. My trans friends are, will be like, yeah, okay, they're still struggling a little, but yeah, their heart's in the right place. We'll get there. Meanwhile, my parents threw me out at 16.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about that. But we have become very stratified. And, to get back to, sort of that film and that optimistic depiction, it gets back to that why I don't mind this sort of, I mind it at the beginning, quotes. At the end, I don't mind this so much because I feel like what's been presented is the idea of a sort of collective effort, of being stronger together. At no point do the characters argue over politics, like, oh, I bet you voted for Eisenhower, didn't you? Eisenhower wasn't in office then, but, Truman, I bet you voted for Truman, I wish we could throw you off this, rocket ship, that stuff doesn't happen. And I think that was true of the time too. You didn't expect to have those conversations. So I don't know. I like the idea at the end that it's a collective effort. We're stronger together. You're talking about this rise of nationalism. As faulty as this movie is, if it were taken today as the message of we as a species have to be prepared for events like this, because they will happen. And we have to be preparing. We have to make sure that we can inhabit this planet, and we have to also be prepared for the fact that, things are going to change. And, we have had what scares me is we have had a nice window here between ice ages, without magnetic pole shifts. We've had a lot of, and with minimum asteroid impacts. In that time, we have invented writing, and we have managed to send crafts outside of the solar system. How amazing is that? But that window ends any given year. There's a, half of 1% chance. Maybe we ought to be focused on this instead of on fishing rights,
Yeah.
Not to...
It is, you're right. That's one of the things. Brexit is that in a nutshell, isn't it, though? That idea of isolationism and the small Britain. And I'm willing to sort of acknowledge that more than, I'll admit there are times, I'm able to pull myself away from the desk and I'll take the, Sky out for a walk, and I'm walking through a field. And it's a lovely day. Even today, sort of, the sky's blue. It's cold, but the sky's blue, and you look around, it's beautiful. And I look up, and you think, well, we've done all right as a species. But you look at, and the thing that I have these moments of existential sort of like dread, where it's beautiful, everything's wonderful, and I look up and just think, beyond that blue is an expanse of frozen nothingness. Outside of our atmosphere is all kinds of stuff that we have no concept of, and and sometimes you do too much reading. I think sometimes if I don't understand it enough, but I've read just enough to be scared. And you say about like the polar magnetic caps and the fact that they're supposed to shift, and we're about 750,000 years beyond. No, sorry, 70. It was 75 or 750,000 years over the last time it should have happened, so we're beyond when it's supposed to have happened. And also things like solar flares, we're due a massive one of those that can affect things, and all this other stuff. And you sort of stood there and you're going like, yeah, all of this is massively out of my hands. Like I have got, on a cosmic level, there is stuff that could mess us up, yet even at a much smaller level, we are pumping crap into the atmosphere. We're dropping plastic into the oceans. We are killing ourselves, when the cosmos pretty much doesn't care about us, and we'll probably do it anyway. And then you just think, why are we overfishing things? Even to that micro level, you do go, we are just overfishing the ocean. Why? To keep 13,000 people in a job in Britain. The lunacy of that. When you look at the wider thing and go, why don't you take those ships, and instead of them fishing fish, which won't be eaten now because we can't sell the fecking things in Europe, and no one in Britain actually likes the fish that they're fishing, take those nets, take those ships, and trawl for plastic out the crap out of the sea. pay for that and come back and recycle it into pellets and use it for something else to build houses out of in the North Africa, or here you go.
Oh, now you're sounding like such a hippie. Look at hippies.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a vegetarian and I'm moving in the vegan direction. And a big part of it is the damage to this planet. These are not sustainable industries. I mean, in my country, we had people dying in meat plants, which you cannot make secure the way they do it. And I have come to the realization that the way we treat those carcasses of animals, flooding on a conveyor belt, one every 5 seconds, being injected with, additives to make the meat taste better, is related to the way that we treat those humans on that conveyor belt line. And I don't want to be a part of that system. I don't want to be a part of the system that does that. But, seeing us as, it's the shot of the Earth from space, right? I think of all of this air, all of the clouds, all of the atmosphere that we rely on as this tiny ribbon, like this little cellophane clinging to this giant rock. It's so tenuous. Yeah. We are so tenuous. And you're right. All of these things are too big for the mind to comprehend and too big for us to individually change. And yet, in any given year, it's easy to say, just like cold weather in Texas, it's probably not going to happen this year. Let's spend that money on something else. Let's spend that money on fighting the French over fish, or, whatever it is that we do, and all this nonsense.
But do you know what? Texas is a good example. I think, and I say about the fishing thing, is a good example in this country. But this idea of green energy, I mean, energy is an interesting one. But one of the arguments, and it was, I saw it at the Joe Biden's press secretary. What's she called? Can't remember her name. And she's great.
She's great.
I love the fact she's snarky and she'll happily bite you back. She's fun. She's wonderful. But anyway, there were basically this idea of the new Green Deal and all that sort of stuff. And he's an executive order closed down the building of that oil pipeline and all that sort of stuff. And instantly they would come back with like, well, this means that we're going to lose thousands of jobs. And firstly it wasn't, because no one had actually been hired. It was future projections for jobs. It's a different matter. But then they're like, so when are these people going to get their green jobs? And you go, well, in the next couple of years. Like it's not an instant thing. It's going to happen over time. Oh, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. All right. So you want to spend, in order to keep people instantly in a job, which there are ways and means of these of evolutions have got to happen. Move away from things, in order to keep these people in a job. And I'm sure there's other things they can do. You're willing to basically fuck over this planet.
Well,
for the next 10 years, if you want to keep someone in a job for the next 10 years, say, all right, just keep them economically viable and they could be doing something else, you want to basically screw over the planet for the next 50,000 years.
Right.
The short-sightedness of it all, it baffles me nowadays.
Well, and it's the, it's also the zero-sum thinking, right? And that's what the end of this movie gets at, right? First of all, those 1,000 jobs from that oil pipeline, those are 1,000 temporary jobs. Those are not permanent jobs. Those are like 1,000 people being employed for 1 year. Who gives a damn? Yeah. Secondly, the solar and clean energy jobs are already here. It's not like this is an industry that nobody's invented yet. This is a growing industry that's had 1,000 jobs added to it at least every year. I mean, it's growing like hotcakes. So, it's not like those 1,000 jobs. I mean, all of this is stupid. But as you say, it's like, I feel like, one of the moments where I realized that, I lived in a fascist country was when oil is pumping into the Gulf of Mexico and it's rolling up onto, and this gets back to the faith argument and how divided we are. It's rolling onto the Texas beaches. The governor of Texas says, our plan to address this is to pray the oil away, and organizes people to go down to the beaches and pray that oil doesn't hit Texas shores.
Yeah.
And then there are protests in the street. We need those jobs back. Damn that Obama shutting down the oil rigs in the midst of, a global level catastrophe. How dare he shut? We need those jobs back now.
Yeah.
And it's like, as you said, if the job was to distribute plutonium unrefined to every house in the country and, make every house radioactive, and somebody said, this is really killing people. This is terrible. We need to stop doing this. Somebody would say, a lot of people are employed poisoning every American. We need to keep those jobs. What about those jobs? What are you talking about?
It just go much to that thing about the praying. It makes that thing of because it's wrapped in an acceptable faith, so people will listen to it. It's no different to that coven of witches that went down to the New Forest in World War II to cast a spell to stop Hitler from invading Britain. It's no different. Yeah. It's no different whatsoever. But you're right. It's this zero thing. They don't want progress. And again, this is where we're going to get into politics now. But the thing is, it's about representation. It's about the instant, isn't it? The headline. And indignation sells. That's the thing. If a politician can go on air, especially a Republican, and Democrats do it as well, and same over here, every party is looking for that indignation, that righteous indignation, because then they can go, that's what I'm standing for, and I have a moral duty to stand up for this, whether it be jobs in the economy, or our right to bear arms, or right to fish, our sovereignty, our unions and labour, whatever it is. Everyone is looking for that righteous indignation slogan. And, it's why if I'm honest, I struggle I move from, I hand up when I was younger, and I wasn't raised in a particularly conservative house, but I wasn't raised in a Labour house either. But when I was able to vote, I voted Conservative. I was young and stupid. I accept that, right? But you grow and you evolve. And you think, the Conservatives are screwed over this country. And then you start to learn, you go, okay, well, I'll vote for Labour. And then you go, well, Labour's better, but they're still so tied to this idea of unionism and all these other things. Well, that's still restrictive. There's still things we can't do. We can't make things better because we're restricted by this. And it's hard to then vote for these because of the party politics. So you just look at everything and go, I'm voting for the best, the lesser evil. But it's all still evil, and that's and that's what getting back to the film. I'm like, this film sort of projects this positivity of unification for the greater good, and accepting, all right, well, I've got a bit apart from the end. And the end almost feels tacked on, and we'll get to this the indignation then. But there is this sense of sort of like, well, we've got to do this. We are better together in this film that just doesn't exist, I think, anymore.
Well, I mean, I reject the phrase, the lesser of two evils. I think a lot of times we're talking about somebody who's not sufficiently good. And there's a big difference between somebody who's not sufficiently good and somebody who's also evil. But I take your point, and I passionately believe that, I don't believe that Belus is going to come zooming through our solar system, but we do face potential extinction level events. A day will come in which we are faced with this.
Yep.
Our odds are not good presently of surviving.
Nope.
On that day, I mean, we know this is coming. We have to be as prepared and do our best to maximize our odds of survival as a species. And this is not just, it's not America surviving. It's not Britain surviving. It's us surviving as a species. And what I don't understand is, we've evolved as a tribal species, suspicious of that tribe over the hill. And that's kept us alive, frankly, right? I mean, they look different, they talk different. Let's, be a little suspicious because odds are at some point they're going to try to kill us. And that was a pretty good bet as time went on. We're just not in that world anymore. I mean, we didn't evolve in skyscrapers with cell phones and these joys and wonders. And, as much as we complained about, like, we're both, I think it's fair to say, have some sort of suspicion of political correctness. So many of my own understanding of my politics and my understanding of the world comes from this long-term view of, is partly the role of government, that there are situations in which, you have the crisis of the commons, in which what is correct for a family or a kin group is to use public resources, right, to get a little bit ahead. It's a job of government to cut those options off and make them more costly, so that to maneuver us into more and more non-zero sum, right? But in the long run, public policy matters all have to be determined by non-zero sum thinking. And I don't know why that still seems mind-boggling to people. It's us versus them. It's divide up, everybody. And, if I don't understand somebody's experience because of their religion or their ethnicity or their gender identification or sexual identification, that's fine. I don't have to understand you to understand you're part of the collective. And if you are suffering needlessly, the collective is losing functionality. Yeah. We are better off when people are able to thrive together and express. So, I mean, that's practical. That doesn't come from some namby-pamby, hippieism in me. And ultimately, if we keep doing that generation after generation, maybe we'll survive when Zira comes through.
Well, again, you say it's this thing about micro versus macro, isn't it? This idea of the tribe surviving and doing what it takes to survive. Especially during COVID, during lockdown, your tribe is who you live with, or who you are in, let's say, a bubble with. For the British terminology, who's your bubble? Whether it be a healthcare, a childcare bubble, or or a healthcare bubble, or whatever it is, you are looking to protect that collective there, and so you will do things in order to protect that. And that's why when this first kicked off, everyone hoarded, for some reason, toilet paper. Like the one thing that you need and does everything in the house, apparently. But like I said, there was the hoarding, and that was the thing.
We eat toilet paper, so it serves multiple purposes.
Eating it saves him wiping up the other end. But basically, that's where the hoarding came from. Was this instant response of like, here's my tribe, here's what I've got to protect, so I've got to go buy 1,500 cans of Pepsi. So I'm going to go and do that, whatever it was. And like I say, but when you look at it on a macro level, and you do look at the whole of the world, and you go, for these major events, whether it be ice storms in Texas, forest fires in California or Australia, or an earthquake or whatever, you sort of look at it and go, if we were all better off, we could manage these things a lot easier. There wouldn't be people whose homes just get destroyed and they're left without insurance and homeless, or they lose their jobs, and we're like, oh, right, the government have got to bail them out. Oh, no, because actually as a collective, we've managed to manage all this kind of stuff. Like, there is a way of doing this. It's just we don't want to admit it and face up to it. And as you say, as I get older and I look at it, I just look at the world and go like, why? Why is this so hard? Like, I'm not clever enough to figure it out and to lead on that. Like, I'm not going to be that person. But there are people that clearly want to do that, but the system seems to keep stopping them, and I just there's a frustration there. So yeah.
Well, and in Texas, they were told 10 years ago this is going to happen when they had the last freeze 10 years ago. Yeah. They were told time to winterize, and they decided, well, first of all, we don't want to spend that money, because it's just not sexy. You're not going to win any votes by building a levee. It's just never going to happen, right? Because that levee is designed for 30 years on, it's going to save, 100,000 lives potentially.
Yeah.
But today, it's just going to cost you millions of dollars. But we have to make these kinds of investments. And if we don't, we end up just bailing people out after they've starved and died and frozen and all of this nonsense for no reason.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, again, if you would take that, I mean, this idea, you say this, that thing of protect, forward projection, this idea of protecting for the future. Even if you want to reintroduce the faith argument, this idea of like, okay, we are currently going through an international COVID crisis. This is a true pandemic. It's cost, millions of lives. Not in just instant death, but there's going to be, we don't know the long-term results of this in 5-10 years of people dying with all kinds of, associated illnesses and disabilities. So, but then you go, well, okay, we had SARS. There was Ebola. There was a potential Ebola outbreak. So we've had these things. And you go, if you wanted to take the faith argument, again, with like forest fires or this ice storm, you sort of go, can you not see that maybe God's giving you a test? Or your deity is going, do you know what? I'm just going to give you in my terminology from a project manager term, I'm just going to we're just going to run a system test.
Right.
We're not going to do a full load. I'm going to run some stuff through it. We're going to run some, whatever it is, some widgets through this, see how it stands up to a bit of a test.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got through SARS, it burned off, and everyone went, "Oi, we did all right in that one." A couple of cases of Ebola. Oh, we're on it. We got that one done. A book's created that says, here's how you should deal with pandemics. Obama does it. We have one in this country. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, it goes out the window. And if you want to take this as a further test, you're now doing the load test. This is you now pushing on something a little bit tougher. Let's really test those boundaries and test the sort of how this thing stands together. Nope. We are not listening. And if there is a deity up there, if there's God up there, he's going, I'm giving them chance after chance. Like, look, something big's going to come down the pipe. They better be ready for it. I keep giving them a way of getting ready for this, and they ain't doing it. And I can't help but think about that. The joke of the man who's drowning, and the lifeboat goes out, and the lifeboat says, the religious man's drowning. The lifeboat goes out, and he says, no, you won't save me. God will save me. And they keep trying to save him. No, God will save me. And eventually he drowns, and he gets to the gates of heaven. He says to God, "Why didn't you save me?" He says, "I sent you a freaking lifeboat."
Yeah, exactly.
It's that same thing again of like, look, we're being sent these things. If you have faith.
I think the worst thing that can be charged against religion is that and I think against any set of beliefs is that it's fundamentally anti-evolutionary, right? That whether it's Galileo or the civil rights movement, religion was always on the wrong side. And as much as people can say, yes, many scientists have tried to discover God's wonder, the civil rights movement was galvanized around religious rhetoric. The majority of people who were religious were on the opposite side and used religion to defend that. Having said that, there are plenty of people who, in the spirit of this film, see exactly what you are saying. And I hear a lot of people, my mother is actually a minister. My mother would say, it says in scripture that God gave us responsibility for the earth and, for the animals. That doesn't mean, yay, those are ours, go around, honor and destroy it. It means it's your job to be in charge of this responsibly. But I think that was that kind of amelioration between private faith and society, or private faith and science. In the 1950s, for as much as 50s society was filled with racism and all kinds of problems, sexism, it was a madman culture. but there was also the sense of neighborhood that we've talked about, and of, being in it together and ameliorating these interests. Whereas now, in that coming unglued, and for some very good reasons, right? There are benefits to that, but in that coming unglued, I do see that people now say, well, global warming, I know, no matter what data you present to me, it's all fake, because only God can destroy the world. God created this world, only God can destroy it. At that point, you're beyond anti-evolutionary, right? You are in a global suicide pact. I mean, that cannot be permitted. I mean, that cannot be acceptable in any way, shape, or form.
No, I agree, and it's the same for. I saw a debate between a sort of an astrophysicist and a flat earther, and the flat earther sort of was saying, "Oh, it was amazing. It was on YouTube, and it was. I just watched these things to sort of make myself feel better about things." But it was this idea that the flat earther said, "I trust my senses. I look out the window and the world is flat." And then, so the guy, the astrophysicist, pulled out a photo and says, "Well, here is a photo that was taken from, the whatever it was, International Space Station of Earth. So you go, here's the curvature of the Earth. Yeah, we've now taken multiple photos of this, and here's a photo, of the Earth as a globe, and we can see it rotating. So your senses are now showing." He says, "Well, that can easily be faked with computer graphics." And he's like, "Well, this was made, but this is a photograph that was taken. So, what do you think the International Space Station is circling? Oh, it's just going around the rim of the. And you can't win. After a bit, you're just like, all right. As you said, it's hard fought or hard won science, and because I came to this conclusion a little bit. It was funny of watching this film, and then I watched this thing because I was just doing some research online. It came to this flat earther thing. There's a curve, and I forget the name of it now, but it's about science progress, how science progresses, and how it's an exponential curve. Like every our
this
knowledge,
is the singularity, right?
Yes, literally heading towards the singularity, and this idea of but all of our knowledge, and it's sort of when you talk about the Roman Empire lasted for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and in that they invented all these things. Yeah, but not in a week. It happened over time, over hundreds of years. And then you sort of go, okay, well, what have we done in the last 20 years? Well, we've done this masses and masses of stuff. And again, you talk about evolution. We've reached a point where our brains just sort of go, I'm not entirely sure I can cope with this knowledge or this speed at which we are now finding things out, and not to sort of, punch down at anybody that doesn't believe in these things, but to sort of basically go, no, I can't engage with this information. It's too big. So if I can't engage with it and I can't understand it, then it ain't real.
Yes. Well, I mean, the flat Earth thing is particularly egregious, and I mean, faith is non-falsifiable, right? I mean, I mean, what's so upsetting to me is I worry that in the future this effect is only going to exaggerate, because my father's generation could understand basically all the parts of a car. My dad didn't, but somebody of that generation could. Today, not so much, right? I mean, when I was growing up, I could take a computer apart and figure it out. Today, you need a special device just to do that. You look at, I have reached the point where I just can't take everything apart and figure it out. What's especially egregious about that example with the flat Earth is your cell phones don't, GPS doesn't work. Cell phones don't work if it's a flat Earth, right? You need actually Einsteinian relativity to even get this shit to work. So they don't understand that. But the more things become complex and specialized in knowledge, the more we almost have to check out and say, well, I'm not going to understand, quantum computers, right? Yep. I mean, there just comes a point in your life where you say, all right, that's too specialized. I can take the gist of it and believe it, but there are certain things that I'm not going to really understand. And I don't need to. But I worry that, what upsets me is there was a sort of phenomenon after 9/11 where there was an Islamophobic phenomenon. But people said, like, okay, these people, quote unquote, could never build the World Trade Center. They could never build a jumbo jet, but they could take ours and fly it in and destroy it. Our culture is one of creation. Their culture is one of destruction, right? This was bandied about quite frequently in the U.S. in the post 9/11 years. And I always think, but the problem there is religion. Religion did not build your Christian American religion did not build those jumbo jets. And in fact, left to its own devices, never would have. Was hostile to all of these things. So somebody's personal views that have nothing to do with science or that are incompatible with science, we still benefit from them. So I see these flat earthers and I see these anti-science people and they're using the internet to spread their views.
What's it? The organization, like, it's either called the Global, I think it's called the Global Flat Earth Association. And you sort of look at that and you sort of look at them and you go, I want to look you in the face and I want you to just tell me what you
globe?
Yeah. Show me how you're a global organization when it should. Could you not just say disc? I don't know what it would be. A discal. It's what do they say? It's turtles all the way down, or elephants all the way down.
Yeah, well, turtles on each other's backs, right?
That's it. Yeah, turtles all the way down. It's interesting to sort of see. We're going back, and I think the one things I want to touch on before, sort of as we come to the end, though, is more specific for the film. Though, it's interesting how we have gone back to a film made. Well, really, I suppose it was 51. So what's that? Sort of 70 years ago, actually. Sort of 70 years. This film was released 70 years ago. And we are sort of saying, yes, I will, as you say, I will highlight and agree that, like, the 50s were not a great time for a lot of people. They were very sort of bigoted and that sort of thing. However, in general sort of terminology, there's an optimism that exists at that point that is, that we look at it and going, look at this film. It's really presenting this optimistic view of the world or optimistic view of the future. What has gone on in that 70 years for us to have reached this place? And, is it we just taking a snapshot from a single film? It'll be interesting to see when we get through all of these films of this period, because they literally go from 51 to 59. And we look at through this decade, maybe we should do a sort of a bit of an overview of this decade from these films. Is how has our views changed of that decade? From seeing some of these films?
Well, I think there are a couple of things come to mind. One is that, there was such restriction on what you could present in film. The 1950s in literature is a lot more, it's a totally different story, right? Yeah. It is a lot more cynical. But yeah, I mean, in film, you're dealing with things like the Hays Code, right? I mean, the remainders of that, and the Catholic League is still really active. I mean, so you really have to present more of
sanitized.
Yes, right. So that doesn't necessarily reflect a real. We always have to be careful, right? That it's not like everybody was like all in it together. Well, not really. The other thing that occurs to me is. Sometimes people complain about sort of multiculturalism as, dividing and destroying this 1950s is unity. And I think the truth is probably a confusion of cause and effect that, I'm always disgusted. I like this Americana and stuff like that. But there comes a certain point at which I feel the vomit rising up in me as I realize, like, yeah, all those cool shots of drive-ins, there are no black people.
Yeah.
Everybody's white. And
This is possibly the whitest film we have watched in all the seasons of
and
this
that's
shit.
saying something.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no concern about diversity on that spaceship, right? The good thing is, I don't know if you've seen these points about science fiction where African Americans critics have said it is clear they're not planning on having us around.
Yeah.
When humanity gets to that other planet, like there's some white guys on that ship going like, maybe losing the entire human race was a small price to pay. Things are so pure now on this new planet.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 50s. It wouldn't surprise me if they had a sign that sort of said, for some of the seats, whites only, and someone else just went, "We're not going to need that. I wouldn't worry about it." And again, I think if I was to watch this, and again, I watched. When you're a kid and you watch these films, and again, like that, in that sort of these older films from the 50s and the 60s and stuff, you don't recognize these things.
Mm-hmm.
Watching it in 2021, it is so abundantly obvious, and like you say, sort of like jarringly so, that not even in some token way is there a black character or a in any way, shape, or form, and it's
They didn't even bother to put like a step and fetch a janitor in, going
Nope.
like, no. It's just what is the future of humanity then, right?
Mm-hmm.
We made it to another planet. Yeah, I mean it's really kind of horrifying. But the point that I was going to say about like the rise of multiculturalism is what happened in the 50s and the 60s in this country was that African Americans said essentially, you guys are all about coming together and following the government. You left us out in the 40s. We didn't get, we got redlined. We didn't get included in the New Deal. We've inherited poverty, for 100 years. We want to be part of that unified project that you guys are all about. Just include us as citizens, as full citizens, voting rights and everything else. And, we're all good. And then at that point, the white majority started saying, I'm not sure if we're all in it together after all.
Yeah.
So in retrospect, people complain about, political correctness and multiculturalism. But I think that it may be the reverse, that really these pleas to broaden the notion of that collective project to just say, let's make sure that spacecraft isn't totally white, made the white majority say, maybe we need to have multiple spacecraft. Or maybe we're not really in this together after all.
Well, again, like I say, it's difficult because we have gone on about how this film does have that positivity for the future. Like generationally, it does. Because it is about the young and it is about the sort of like a selflessness, even to the end. Like the end note is Hedron and he pulls back Stanton, doesn't he? Sort of, and says like, no, we're not going on the ship because basically you're a vile old bastard, and I'm just sort of like trying to do the right thing for this other person. So there is this thing of like the next generation going on. So from a generational point of view, like I do think there's a positivity there. There's a reliance on science. There's this idea of things being tested and thought through, and all this other stuff, which is good and positive. However, like going back to my point before, when they show that design of that ship, like it's all laid out, like, and I would be saying like, why you should be given out as a universal thing of like, look, we could save more than 40 people. We can only save 40 because we can only build one ship. But if we can give this out to the world, and you're telling me every government's gone, nah, it's ridiculous, and is a bit irksome. But like you say, I think it has to be taken in the context. It's clearly the whitest ship that that's ever existed, but it's described as an ark, and that also becomes a bit of a problem because that's supposed to save all God's creatures. And one of the things I also thought was interesting about this, they talk about chickens and a couple of other small animals. Right. Well, they're clearly for food.
Yeah, that upsets me as a vegetarian, by the way.
There's no notion in this of again, like we've got to save some. And again, it's coming into science. If this was a modern film, there would be we have been able to take the DNA or embryos of these creatures, and we can then repopulate and this other stuff. So, again, I think it's an issue of science knowledge and science capability and thought rather than anything else. Because again, they make a real good point in this film about weight. Like the weight of this ship is critical. Like they can't spare kilos or pounds or whatever, so they can't go like we've got all these cows to go on or an elephant. Like they can't do that. And again, I think so. It's interesting. Like they've put a workaround in there. But I do think you're right that whilst I feel there's a positivity in this film, there is blatantly it's covered in 50s bigotry, I suppose, unintentional. I don't think it's not overtly racist. Like they don't say we're not having those people on there. They just they just sort of leave them out. It's like but again,
they're not part of the worldview, right?
No, it just comes back to that tribalism, I suppose, doesn't it?
Well, what's really funny there, I mean, first of all, if you look carefully at the footage, they keep calling it the Ark, but if you zoom in on the rocket ship, it says SS White Privilege. What was really funny is it starts at the Mount Kenya Observatory, so there's a little bit of like geographic diversity here, but then everybody's white.
I wonder how much that will go through these films. I'm pretty sure it'll be prevalent throughout all.
Absolutely. I expect that.
One of the final things I wanted to sort of touch on before we do go out is we talked about the devastation scenes. It doesn't last very long. And they hold a lot of it is the main cast are sort of held in a bunker or an office, and you see them shaking around in a bit of a Star Trek fashion. But I have to say, I love the miniatures in this, and the way some of the special effects and they superimpose water gushing through New York, and there's a miniatures of water coming over these treetops stuff. I absolutely loved it. I thought that the scenes of the effects of the star and stuff traveling past and stuff were brilliant. What were your thoughts?
No, I really like those too. And apparently they were very influential. I think it was George Powell produced this, and he had done some similar movies and went on to do some more. And that's what the line from Rocky is, right? Said George Powell to his bride. I mean, I love them. I agree with you. And I think they look so much better. What's amazing to me is I think they look so much better than most of the CGI I see. And I don't know if that's just, I have a friend of mine who's just turned 28, who's the closest thing I have to a son. And he watched Star Trek recently for the original series for the first time on my recommendation. And he could not get over just how primitive it was. And he was like, it's so silly. And I was like, look, man, the time will come where you feel about the special effects of the next generation the way I feel about CGI.
Yeah.
And you will look back and be like, that primitive CGI in those Marvel movies, that is to my eyes what like the simple sets of like, it's a Romulan spacecraft. It's a wooden, wall with another wooden wall attached, like spray paint it, attach a little, plastic doohickey and spray paint that too. Good enough. Nobody's paying attention. No, I love those miniatures. I think it looks great. I love the alien planet at the end. I love the rocket ship. I mean, it's awesome.
I love the aesthetic on that. And again, that sort of some of the way it was done. Like I say, I love the miniatures. I always love miniatures. Like, I some of my first science fiction was like Thunderbirds and Joe 90 and Captain Scarlet. So those sort of Jerry Anderson use of puppets and miniatures, like I love all that sort of stuff. I always think it looks great. So to see that, there was one scene that I did sort of that stuck out a little bit. I still liked it though. Was they use a still of like an empty New York, and they're like the streets are empty, and I'm like looking and going, not really.
Yeah, I thought that too.
But yeah, it works, and I think because of the aesthetic of the film, like it really works, and I enjoy even, like I say, the design of the ship, and that moment when they sort of It's a little bit Prometheus when they're sort of like, is it breathable? And the guy's like, well, we've got nowhere else to go. Bring it down. And I'm like, whoa, surely you should have a vote about this, or at least test it, or do something. But like, he's not wrong.
I thought that too, and it's so ridiculous that he's like, oh, it's the tastiest air I've ever breathed.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, God, what are the odds that the nitrogen content is going to be similar to ours? I mean, there are so many elements that you get in a slightly different proportion, and air smells acrid or terrible, or and it's like, well, we can kind of breathe it. We're either going to be high from too much oxygen or more likely struggling for breath, but it's definitely not going to smell good. Like everything is just utopian. It's another Eden, but that's because God provided it ultimately, right? Yes. And I you make a very good point. I have a feeling what race that deity is. I think I can. Yes.
Yeah, that Jesus was blonde and possibly from California. But yeah, I like the ending though. Again, the design and the aesthetic is good, and it's positive. I mean, like even the dog has puppies, and you're like, oh, it's all lovely.
New life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's all this, but there is that thing of sort of like, if this again was a modern film, like it's almost like The Walking Dead. It's like, that's the starting point. Now we're going to have 6 seasons of how terrible and how much of a struggle it is to survive on this planet.
Well, what's really cool is apparently I looked at the plot description online. There was a sequel to the novel that started this, right? This is like When Worlds Collide, and it's called like After Worlds Collide or something. And it's just them on the planet. And apparently, whether it was George Powell or somebody involved with this, I think it was George Powell, wanted to make that as a film and do a sequel to When Worlds Collide, and just never got made.
It would be fascinating to see how they would approach that, because again, the modern version of that would probably be like Walking Dead. Like they'd find out there was a spaceship, not far off, but they're the baddies and all this other stuff, and
the communists got here too.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, the British were too busy arguing over which fish we should be taking with us, and unfortunately we got wiped out. But yeah, no, I do like the ending note of this film. It's very positive. It feels sort of, it's got that sort of the design and stuff. But yeah, the special effects were great. I was a bit like, oh, is it going to look wobbly? Is it going to look a bit naff? But no, I was fully invested in all that, as I watched it. So.
I also have to say I dig the ramp for the rocket ship.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's such a cool. I mean, it goes back to like sort of like Jules Verne style. Like we're gonna send a rocket pod into space with a giant gun. Like there's a kind of naivete to it. But I love those kinds of old school designs.
That was it. Like it's a rocket. If you're going to draw, if you're a kid and you're going to draw a rocket, this is a rocket. We're going to see one of those again when we watch the Quatermass Experiment. There's a rocket in that I love the design of. It's really sort of like proper like 50s style. That sort of like like nostalgia sort of sci-fi design that I think is fantastic.
I love that stuff. And one of the things that I thought of in seeing the rocket was how, I thought of the phrase "dreams of our fathers." That when we draw a rocket, right, we draw these old school things, right? 1950s futurism, not just Robbie the Robot and the Jetsons and everything, is still so influential to the point where, retrofuturism borrows from it. New versions borrow from it. It's like it's in our DNA. It's in our collective imagination at this point, which then makes me think about some of the wider, racial and cultural depictions of this film and the ways in which we don't examine them or are blind to them as we adopt these kinds of visual tropes and design tropes.
Yeah, I think so. You say about this sort of this retrofuturism, sort of tapping back into this, and again, I think I always think things come around in cycles. Like you say, I think I I'd love to see some of these designs come back into the sort of the mainstream of some sort of choices. But yeah, you're right. I think there are certain things in this film that you wouldn't want to revisit, or if you were to redo Worlds Collide. And again, I could see this being remade, and fitting into that sort of like disaster model. That recently, what was the one they had recently? Greenland, that came out with Gerard Butler and I forget who else was in it, but yeah. And that was very much this thing of like, oh, we're going to be hit by an absolute tidal wave of meteorites, including an extinction level event, and we're not going to escape the Earth, but we are going to go. We are going to go into bunkers underneath the Earth. And that was sort of like the way of that, and that was nowhere near as positive. Like again, that was about this selection of people, and again, it has this idea of it's all about based around the government. Okay, the government have selected these people, and they have been selected because they have a purpose in the new world. And so this one, they've got the Gerard Butler plays like an architect and engineer. So they're like, well, you're the best in the country, so we're going to take you with us because we need to build and do all this stuff in post extinction event. And then all this stuff happens. But the film's then is about how people react. It's almost like the middle part of this film. The entire film is the middle part of this film, basically going like, people fighting against the military and doing everything they can to try and get to those bunkers and so on and so forth. That is, if anything, that's probably the closest version you're going to get to that. And again, it's not about this rising tide, helping all ships or all in it together. It's very much about, look, we can only save this many people, and everyone else, you're all screwed.
Zero sum.
Yeah.
Right.
And sort of, but then everyone's sort of fighting it to the extent of like it's heartbreaking the way they've done it at times. It's sort of Gerard Butler, his wife and his kid, and they're driving away, and a woman literally runs out into the road with her daughter going, look, you can take her. Like, and he's like, well, I can't. I've got this. We are literally we've been given these bans. Like, I can't, they won't take her. And one of the things they find out in the film is when they get to the military base to go in is the kid's got diabetes. Gerard Butler's kids, and the military are like, yeah, we can't take him. And there's this big argument. And at one point, one of the military leaders comes forward and goes, look, I'm not going either. I'm doing this to try and ease this transition, but I'm just as dead. I'm just as dead as the rest of these people. Like I didn't make it either. So, and I'm not making a fuss. And it's an interesting moment of going, I'm still doing my duty. I'm here filtering through papers, doing this thing, filling this plane up, sending people on their way. And when those planes leave, I'm not on them. And it does make you think, it's that thing again of like,
he's got that spirit of the collective that we're talking about in this film, right? I mean, there's that character that expresses, the same sort of thing. It's just that the film is weighted in the other direction.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting. Like, I mean, we could do a whole season of sort of apocalyptic films like this. I was thinking of like Melancholia, Seeking a Friend for the End of the World. It's interesting that the more recent versions tend to be, oh no, we're not going to get out of this. Yeah. We're just all going to die. There's no survival. At best, we'll be underground. But there's this whole subgenre of just no, except that the species is over, which is, I mean, man, that's depressing. That's, it might be true, but it's depressing.
Yeah. It is probably, even David Attenborough came out recently and said, oh no, global warming, it's all gone too far. There's no pulling it back. And but he's like in his 90s, so he's like, I warned you in the 70s and you didn't listen then, and you're not listening now. So
good luck.
I'm off soon.
Yeah.
There's not much I can do with it anymore. So yeah, I don't know. It is. I think it's sort of almost like an acceptance, and I don't think that will happen when it comes. I think there'll be panic and it'll all go Mad Max for a little while, but we shall see. Anyway, we're coming to the end, and so we have been talking about when worlds collide, and so just before we talk about what were your final thoughts then? Any final thoughts on the when worlds collide from 1951?
Well, I think we've gotten at some of the the racist and sort of culturalist points of the ways in which in this happy presentation of people coming together and of humanity surviving amazingly. Um, you know, there is privilege and there are choices being made. And I think the privilege of, Hendren to just like, yeah, I'm going to throw this kid on, throw this dog on, um, really struck me at the time. But I still think that from a writing perspective and a directing perspective, it's a well put together movie that even in its clunkiness has a better structure and a better just coherence as a story. I know what every scene is doing. It's got some charm. It's got some nuance. I mean, from a structural perspective, I like it a lot. What about you?
No, I agree. I really enjoyed it. It's like I say, just of itself, it's a fun film. Like it's throwback. It's very retro to watch it, but I enjoyed it. It was a good film. It has its problems, as we say, sort of like when you were to watch it, you have to watch it in the context of a film that was made in 1951. And it's trying to present, I think, even at that point, like I say, by the Hays Code and everything else, this positive view on a post-war America. Despite the fact of its own whiteness. Regarding the story, though, I think there's some elements that I do have some slight problem. You're right. The story flows as it should do. It's fine. It's still a little clunky. I think I'm used to certain things coming up earlier. The couple that get chosen, the discontent and eventual sort of like revolt at the end of the film. Modern sort of filmmaking, and probably what I'm more used to is sort of like I don't want, exactly as you said, I don't want them all introduced at the very, very beginning to have like 20 minutes of like, here's all these characters, which is typical of disaster films. But when they're brought together at that place in the base, like, here's a couple and here's this guy who's a bit of a malcontent and probably going to start the rumblings around this, and just have those things in the background a bit more would probably have made that a little smoother. Other than that, like there's some odd little bits and pieces, but it's just of a time. I really enjoyed this, and I'll be honest, I was a little nervous that this was going to be a bit flat. But no, I think this is a good film, and I think it's a recommend actually to go and check this out. It's widely available in different places actually. So, yeah, go check out When Worlds Collide. It's a good film.
Yeah, and very influential, I think, on those later disaster movies. And even if you have to cringe through a little bit here and there, it's well put together, and it's an hour and a half.
Yeah,
you're not going to lose 3 hours watching Thanos.
Yeah. What I would say is as well, you say like you may have to cringe through things. If you're watching any film from the 50s, there's cringeworthy stuff, any kind of film. So it's well worth checking out. The next film on our journey is it came from outer space from 1953. So we're going to be now dealing with our first sort of not quite alien invasion, but our first alien monster movie. So again, another one. I think I've seen this many years ago, but it's been a long time. So I'm really looking forward to getting to this one. But yeah, Julian, this has been a really good conversation. Actually, I've enjoyed talking about this.
Yeah, me too, brother. And I'm off to Zira.
Yeah, jumping on the SS White Privilege and
guilty as charged.
Yeah. But ladies and gentlemen, if you have checked out this film, or you've got any opinions about this film or any of the films that we're going to be covering in our sort of 50s block, reach out and let us know. You can find us on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. And it's wonderful to sort of have that conversation and talk with people. So do get in contact.
Amen.
But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall talk to you next week.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.